The lab results arrived on a Tuesday. That detail would matter later, not to the woman receiving them, but to the prosecutor who would spend months trying to explain to a jury why this particular case began on a Tuesday and had been unfolding, quietly, for 6 months before anyone knew. The doctor's name was Eleanor Vance. She had been reviewing metabolic panels for 16 years. She had seen elevated liver enzymes caused by alcohol. She had seen kidney function irregularities triggered by supplements, by herbal remedies patients forgot to mention, by the quiet statin use that older men rarely volunteered during intake. She knew what unexpected lab values looked like when they had a reasonable explanation. This did not have a reasonable explanation. The woman sitting across from her was 31 years old. She worked in grants administration at a mid-sized university in the Pacific Northwest. She had no history of heavy drinking, no prescription medications, no reported use of NSAIDs beyond ibuprofen for tension headaches. She ate what her coworkers ate. She drank from the same break room cooler. Eleanor Vance looked at the panel a second time, then a third. She set the printout on her desk, pressed her palms flat against its surface, and exhaled through her nose the way a person does when they are deciding whether to say what they are thinking out loud. "You've been poisoned," she said. Not allegedly, not it appears. She said it the way Danny Cruz would later describe it, with the weight of the document in her hand and the willingness to name what it said. The woman across from her asked how. Eleanor told her she didn't know yet. She told her she was going to find out. That conversation was the first frame of a story that had already been running for 6 months. The second frame was in a break room on the third floor of an administrative building on the same university campus, where a woman named Catherine Hollis had just placed a small Tupperware container in the refrigerator, lid sealed, initials KH, written in black marker on the lid, next to a post-it note that said Wednesday. She did not look at the camera. There was no camera. But Danny Cruz, reconstructing this later, would note that the placement of the Tupperware, second shelf, far left, behind a bag of spinach, was not random. It was deliberate. It was the same spot every time. The woman's name was Catherine Hollis. She was 37. She had worked in the same grants office as the woman whose lunch she had been poisoning for 6 months. Her title was grants coordinator, same as the victims. They sat 14 feet apart, separated by a low partition and a geography of ambition that neither of them had ever mapped out loud. The victim's name was Rebecca Solis. She was 31, originally from Sacramento, the first in her family to graduate from a 4-year university. She had worked at the university for 4 years. She had applied for an open position, senior grants administrator, twice. The first time, she was not selected. The second time, the selection committee recommended her. HR confirmed the recommendation. The posting was filled from outside the university. She found out on a Friday afternoon from an email that used her name twice and said nothing. She did not make a scene. She did not go to her supervisor. She reorganized her workload above and beyond what was asked of her, and she earned a departmental commendation 6 months later, one that Catherine Hollis watched from her desk, 14 feet away, as the email announcement crossed everyone's inbox at 9:07 on a Tuesday morning. Catherine had applied for that same senior grants administrator position. She had been on the short list. She had been interviewed by the same committee. She had been told in her exit interview with HR that she was a strong candidate, but that the panel had decided to go in a different direction. She had watched Rebecca Solis earn the commendation. She had watched a third promotion cycle open up, and Rebecca apply again, and the job go to someone from outside again, someone with 8 years of experience instead of 4. She had watched Rebecca accept the rejection with the kind of grace that only someone who had learned not to expect fairness could manage. Catherine had not learned that lesson. She was still waiting for the system to correct itself. Every day it didn't. The distance between what she felt and what she allowed herself to express grew. She managed it at work. She mentioned it to no one. She logged into her laptop each morning and opened her spreadsheets and kept the account current. But she kept a different ledger too, a private one she never wrote down. The method she chose was thallium. Thallium is a metal that was once used as rat poison in the United States, until the EPA banned it in 1975. It is colorless, odorless, and tasteless in solution. It interferes with potassium channels in the body, disrupting cellular function across multiple organ systems. In small doses spread over time, it produces symptoms that look like ordinary illness: fatigue, nausea, nerve pain, hair loss, the kind of metabolic decline that a busy physician attributes to stress, to diet, to the thousand unnamed things that modern life does to a body. She acquired it through a supplier in China, listed as research chemicals, shipped in small quantities to a private postal box she rented under a name that was not hers. The purchase records would later show 17 separate transactions over an 11-month period. Each order was small. Each order was paid from a reloadable prepaid card purchased with cash. The delivery address was a UPS store in a neighboring city. She mixed the thallium into Rebecca Solis's food in the break room refrigerator. The timeline reconstructed later by investigators showed she accessed the refrigerator an average of 3 times per week, once to remove Rebecca's lunch, once to prepare it, once to return it. On some days, she did it twice. She was careful about the timing. She waited until the hallway outside the break room was empty. She used gloves. She washed her hands in the utility sink in the corner of the room, the one meant for mops and cleaning supplies, the one no one used for anything else. The quantity per dose was calibrated to produce symptoms slowly, not enough to hospitalize, not enough to trigger the kind of testing that would expose the agent, just enough to erode, to drain, to make a healthy, ambitious 31-year-old woman feel like her own body was beginning to fail her. Rebecca Solis began losing weight in month 3. She assumed she was stressed. She changed her diet. She started going to the gym. The weight continued to fall. Her hair began to thin. She mentioned it to her doctor during a routine visit. She was tired all the time. Her nails were brittle. Her skin looked off. And her doctor ordered a standard metabolic panel. The first panel showed irregularities. The second, ordered by a specialist, showed more. It was the third test, ordered by Eleanor Vance after a consultation that lasted 90 minutes, that looked at heavy metal levels specifically. Because Eleanor had seen this profile before. Not often, but once, early in her career, a case that had been a homicide, solved because the attending physician remembered a footnote in a toxicology textbook. She ordered the thallium test on a Tuesday. The results came back on a Thursday. The level in Rebecca Solis's blood was consistent with ongoing exposure over an extended period. Not a single event, not environmental, not dietary, ongoing, deliberate. Eleanor called her, told her to stop eating anything she had not prepared herself, told her to bring in the Tupperware she used for lunch, told her not to wash it. Rebecca Solis hung up the phone and sat in her car in the faculty parking lot for 11 minutes. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She sat and she breathed, and she tried to calculate how many lunches that was, and she could not make the number come out right in her head. The investigation that followed moved through 3 phases. The first was internal. University security reviewed camera footage from the break room hallway. Low resolution, 12 frames per second, but enough. The footage showed Catherine Hollis entering the break room at 11:43 a.m. on a Monday, and again at 12:07 p.m., both times carrying nothing out and returning with nothing visible in her hands. The second entry, investigators noted, coincided with the time Rebecca Solis typically left her desk to attend a standing one-on-one with her supervisor, a meeting that had been on her calendar for weeks, a meeting that anyone who shared an office suite would know about. The second phase was financial. Prosecutors obtained records from the UPS store under a subpoena. They traced the postal box to a name, Catherine Hollis, and the prepaid cards to a chain of cash purchases at different retailers across 3 counties. The pattern was precise. 17 purchases over 11 months, each time to coincide with an order from the same Chinese supplier. The third phase was toxicological. The lab analyzed the Tupperware Rebecca brought in after Eleanor's warning. It found traces of thallium, not on the surface, embedded in the seal of the lid, consistent with a substance introduced during food preparation and absorbed into the plastic over repeated use. The case arrived at Catherine Hollis's door, not with a knock, but with a phone call from her supervisor, asking her to come to HR. She drove to the building, parked in the same lot she had parked in for 7 years, walked through the same doors, and sat in the same chair she had sat in for every other HR meeting she had ever attended. The detective was waiting in the room next door. She did not confess. Her attorney, a public defender because Catherine Hollis had depleted her savings over the 11 months of purchases, told her not to say anything without representation present. She agreed. She sat in the interview room and she answered every question with, "I would like my attorney." She did not cry. She did not explain. She did not offer a reason. The evidence did not need her to. The jury trial lasted 11 days. The prosecutor walked through the timeline with the precision of a document examiner. 17 purchases, 17 deliveries, 17 entries into a postal box, 17 corresponding entries in the chain of custody for Rebecca Solis's poisoned lunches, each one traceable through camera footage to the same woman at the same time on the same day of the week. He introduced the toxicology reports. He introduced the lab analysis of the Tupperware. He introduced the financial records showing the prepaid cards and the cash purchases and the Chinese supplier. He introduced a forensic accountant who walked the jury through the pattern with charts that he built, point by point, in real time, on a whiteboard at the front of the room. The defense argued that the financial evidence was circumstantial, that the camera footage was too low resolution to identify anyone with certainty, that the Tupperware had been handled by multiple people, and the trace evidence could have been introduced by anyone, that Catherine Hollis was being prosecuted for being unhappy, for being passed over, for experiencing the same frustrations that millions of workers experience every year without ever harming anyone. The defense called Catherine Hollis to the stand. She testified that she had been passed over for promotion twice. She testified that she had felt angry. She testified that she had felt it was unfair. She testified that she had felt invisible. She did not testify that she had poisoned anyone. Her attorney asked her why she thought the thallium had ended up in the Tupperware. She said she didn't know. The prosecutor in closing held up the Tupperware. He set it on the evidence table. He pointed to the initials KH on the lid, written in the same black marker she used at her desk, the same handwriting that appeared on her personnel forms, her direct deposit authorization, her departmental holiday sign-up sheet. He asked the jury to consider the probability that two people in the same office used the same black marker, the same handwriting style, and the same Tupperware, and that one of them was innocent. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing came 4 months later. Catherine Hollis stood before the judge, and she said something that no one had expected her to say. She said, "I know what I did. I knew from the beginning." The courtroom went quiet. She said she had read about thallium in a graduate toxicology textbook she had ordered online, one she had used as research for a departmental presentation on chemical safety compliance, a presentation she had volunteered to give because she wanted to show her supervisors she was capable of more. She said she had read about the effects. She said she understood what they would do to a person over time. She said she had done it anyway. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. She would be eligible for parole after 7. Rebecca Solis was in the courtroom. She had been in every hearing. She wore a gray blazer, and she did not look at Catherine Hollis when the sentence was read. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her posture was very still, and no one in that room could have told you what she was feeling, because she had spent 6 months feeling things that had no name, and she had learned, in that time, to hold everything very close. The aftermath for Rebecca Solis took years to resolve. The thallium had caused damage to her peripheral nervous system that was, according to her treating neurologist, partially irreversible. She experienced chronic nerve pain in her hands and feet. She experienced periods of severe fatigue that made it difficult to maintain full-time work. She required 3 separate surgical procedures related to complications from the exposure. She filed a civil suit against the university. The university settled for an amount that was not disclosed. She left the grants office. She moved to a different city. She did not publish anything about her experience, and she did not speak to journalists, and she asked in the settlement agreement that her medical records be sealed. She kept the Tupperware. Not the original, that was evidence. She bought a new one, identical, from the same store where she had originally purchased it. She kept it in her kitchen cabinet. She could not explain why, except to say that it was a reminder of something she needed not to forget. What this case reveals about workplace envy is not complicated. Envy becomes dangerous not when it is large, but when it is contained. When a person has no outlet for it, no mechanism for resolution, no way to express it that the system around them will recognize as legitimate. Catherine Hollis was passed over twice. She was qualified. Her frustration was real. She reported it to no one, not because she was incapable of doing so, but because the system she worked in had no language for what she was feeling. There was no grievance process for being overlooked. There was no review mechanism for a promotion decision made by committee. There was only the quiet accumulation of a grievance that had nowhere to go. The dangerous thing about that accumulation is that it does not stay private. It finds an object. It makes a plan. It decides in the privacy of its own logic that if the system will not correct the wrong, the system itself is the obstacle. Catherine Hollis did not poison Rebecca Solis because she hated her. She poisoned her because Rebecca Solis was the evidence that the system had chosen someone else, and Catherine could not make the system explain itself, and the not knowing became something that had to be answered. She answered it with thallium. She answered it for 6 months. The question she never asked, because the environment she worked in had no space for asking it, was whether the system was broken because of Rebecca Solis, whether punishing the person who had been chosen was the same as punishing the system that chose. She decided it was equivalent. She was wrong. But the gap between the grievance and the question, the silence that surrounded it, is the part of this story that does not belong only to Catherine Hollis. It belongs to every office where someone was passed over and told in the language of HR that the decision was final. It belongs to every workplace where ambition was managed rather than recognized. It belongs to every person who sat 14 feet from the person they blamed and said nothing, and let the silence make something that none of them intended. Rebecca Solis still lives in a city where no one knows her story. She works in a different field. She does not talk about what happened to her hands, or why she sometimes stops in the middle of a sentence and waits, without warning, for the fatigue to pass. She has the Tupperware in her cabinet. She does not use it. She keeps it because she needs to remember that it happened, and because forgetting, she has learned, is more dangerous than remembering. The lab results arrived on a Tuesday. The doctor's name was Eleanor Vance. She told her patient that she had been poisoned, and she told her she was going to find out how, and she did. That is the part of the story that is not about resentment or silence or the slow mathematics of workplace grievance. It is about the moment when the machine detects what has been hidden inside it, when the body says what no one else will say, when the document arrives and someone reads it and decides, with the weight of the page in their hand, to name what it says. Eleanor Vance did not know Rebecca Solis. She did not know Catherine Hollis. She looked at the numbers, and she said the thing that the numbers said, out loud, in a room, to a woman who was still alive because the poisoning had not finished its work yet. She called it what it was. That was the beginning of the end of all of it.